Uruk, the city of kings, proud, mighty, and rich beyond measure. But under the rule of one man it trembles, Gilgamesh, the mighty, 2/3 god, 1/3 man, a warrior without equal, a ruler without mercy. The citizens whisper in fear. He takes what he wants, our sons, our daughters. He fears no man, no god. Even the elders plead, but he listens to no one. In the temple of Anu, priests and city elders kneel before a massive golden statue. The high priest speaks, "Great Anu, father of the heavens, hear our cries. Our king is lost, his arrogance. Send us a savior, or send us a weapon to stop him." A sudden gust of wind extinguishes the torches, silence falls, and the gods listened. In a dark and untamed wilderness, the earth trembles. From the ground, a figure emerges, a massive man covered in thick, wild hair. His eyes gleam like those of a beast. From clay and divine will, the gods shaped a man, a warrior as strong as Gilgamesh, but pure, untouched by greed and cruelty. Enkidu takes his first breath, his chest heaving like a storm. He looks around, his senses sharp. Animals gather around him, deer, lions and wolves, accepting him as one of their own. A group of hunters in a dense forest watch in horror as Enkidu runs alongside a herd of gazelles faster than any beast. One whispers, "By the gods, what is he?" Another replies, "He frees the animals from our traps. He's not human." They retreat hastily, their faces pale with fear. At the temple in Uruk, the hunters kneel before the high priest, recounting what they saw. A man, yet not a man. Stronger than any beast, he is beyond this world. The high priest smiles knowingly. Then the gods have answered. He turns to a woman standing in the shadows, Shamat, the temple priestess, a woman of beauty and wisdom. "You must go to him. Teach him our ways." She steps forward, her eyes gleaming with intrigue. "A wild man? Perhaps he is exactly what Uruk needs." And so the first steps of fate were set into motion. The wilderness stretched endlessly, a vast expanse of untamed beauty. Enkidu ran, his feet barely touching the earth, his breath merging with the wind. He was one with the creatures, an untamed force, neither beast nor man. But in the heart of the wild, something new stirred, a whisper of another world, a scent carried by the breeze, unfamiliar yet tantalizing, the scent of humankind. His eyes burned with curiosity, his steps hesitant yet eager, drawn to an unknown call. For days he roamed, his instincts torn between the life he knew and the strange pull towards something greater. His dreams were filled with glimpses of places beyond the trees, of hands reaching, of voices calling his name. Then, at the edge of a river, he saw her. Shamat stood, poised and radiant, her garments flowing like the river's current. She did not move, did not flinch as Enkidu approached, his massive form looming before her. "You are not like them," she said softly, her voice as smooth as water over stone. "You are not like the beasts you run with. You are something more." Enkidu snarled, his body tense, his eyes filled with the untamed fury of the wild. But Shamat did not recoil. Instead, she smiled, a knowing smile, a whisper of promise. "Come," she said, stepping closer. "Come and learn." She reached out, her fingers grazing his rough skin. A shudder ran through him. He had never known the touch of another like him, never felt the warmth of human hands. She led him to the water's edge, where he saw his reflection for the first time. The face staring back at him was neither beast nor god, but something in between. His own hands trembled as he touched his face, realizing what he was. And so beneath the sky, painted in hues of twilight, the wild man took his first steps toward civilization, unaware that destiny had already begun to weave its web around him. By the time the sun rose again, the wilderness would no longer claim him as its own. The air was thick with the scent of men, of metal and smoke, of voices rising in song and strife. As they entered Uruk, eyes turned toward them. The people, in awe and curiosity, whispered about the mighty stranger. "Who is this?" some asked. "He walks like a god, yet his eyes burn with something wilder than man." For days, Shamat guided Enkidu, teaching him the ways of men. She showed him fire, how it warmed the body, how it tamed the darkness. She taught him words, their weight, their power. And slowly, the wildness in his eyes softened. He ate bread for the first time, its coarse texture foreign to his tongue. He drank wine, its warmth spreading through him like the first light of dawn. Each taste, each lesson, pulled him further from the beast he had been. He learned the names of things, the sky, the earth, the river. He learned to laugh, to question, to wonder. Yet with each new discovery, something inside him ached, a distant memory of freedom, of the untouched wild that now lay behind him. His transformation was not without struggle. The first time he entered a crowded market, the sounds overwhelmed him, the smell of cooked meat, the clinking of metal, the laughter of merchants. These things were foreign, chaotic. He recoiled, his muscles tense, but Shamat placed a hand on his arm. "Breathe, Enkidu," she said. "This too is life." Day by day he adapted. He spoke more, walked with a steady gait, learned to listen and to respond. And yet the wild still lurked beneath his skin, coiled like a predator, waiting to pounce. News of the newcomer spread swiftly, reaching the ears of Gilgamesh himself. Intrigued, the king descended from his throne, stepping into the streets of Uruk. And there, in the heart of the city, beneath the towering walls, two titans met. Their eyes locked, neither willing to yield. The people gathered in breathless anticipation. The earth itself seemed to hold its breath. Gilgamesh took a step forward, a smirk curling his lips. "You are the wild man," he said, "the one who thinks himself my equal." Enkidu squared his shoulders, his voice steady. "I think nothing. I know." Then without a word, the ground beneath them shook as Enkidu lunged. A clash of titans, fists like thunder, the streets of Uruk trembling under their battle. Walls cracked, the river swelled, the heavens themselves seemed to watch. The fight raged on, neither willing to submit. Enkidu struck with the force of a storm, but Gilgamesh met every blow with equal strength. They crashed through the streets, their struggle toppling market stalls, sending terrified citizens scrambling. It was not just a battle of strength, but of will. Gilgamesh, the ruler of Uruk, had never met a match. And yet, here stood Enkidu, unyielding, his every breath a defiance. At last, as the dust settled and their limbs trembled with exhaustion, they stood facing one another. Then something unexpected happened. Gilgamesh laughed. It was a deep, rumbling sound, filled not with arrogance, but with recognition. "You are strong," he said, "stronger than any I have faced." Enkidu, breathing heavily, managed a small smirk. "And you are not just a tyrant." The people of Uruk watched in stunned silence as the two warriors, who had sought to destroy one another, stood side by side. No words needed to be spoken. A bond had been forged in battle, stronger than stone, deeper than blood. For the first time, Gilgamesh had met his equal, and Uruk would never be the same again. The dust of their battle still lingered in the streets of Uruk, the city once trembling beneath the unchecked might of Gilgamesh, now stood silent in awe of the man who had matched him, blow for blow. Enkidu had proven himself not only as an equal, but as something more, a companion, a brother in arms. Gilgamesh, his chest rising and falling with the weight of exhaustion and exhilaration, turned to Enkidu. "You are no mere wild man. You were sent by the gods, but for what purpose?" Enkidu, still catching his breath, looked toward the sky. "Perhaps not to fight you," he admitted. "Perhaps to stand beside you." A silence settled between them, not of tension, but of understanding. The gods had sent Enkidu to balance Gilgamesh, and balance had been struck. The following days saw an unfamiliar sight. Gilgamesh and Enkidu walking side by side through the streets of Uruk, speaking as friends rather than foes. The people, once fearful of their king's unchecked power, now watched with fascination. The two warriors, so different in origin, yet alike in spirit, had found common ground. But the fire of battle still burned in Gilgamesh's heart, and soon he grew restless. "We are more than men, Enkidu. We are stronger, faster, greater. Why should we be confined to the walls of Uruk when there are wonders beyond?" Enkidu narrowed his eyes. "And what is it you seek?" Gilgamesh turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the sun set behind the distant forests. "Glory," he said, "a name that will echo for eternity. I will not die an ordinary king, forgotten in time." He spoke of a great challenge, of a creature beyond imagining, the guardian of the cedar forest, Humbaba, a beast of colossal strength, chosen by the gods to protect the sacred trees. "They say none can defeat him," Gilgamesh mused. "But we are not like others." Enkidu hesitated. He knew of Humbaba, knew the whispers of his monstrous power, knew that even the gods feared him. "This is not a simple hunt, Gilgamesh. This is a challenge to the gods themselves." Gilgamesh's smirk did not waver. "Then let them watch." The morning sun cast long shadows over Uruk as Gilgamesh and Enkidu made their final preparations. The city, though accustomed to the audacity of its king, murmured with uncertainty. The journey ahead was not one of mere conquest, it was a defiance of the gods themselves. At the temple of Shamash, the sun god, they sought a blessing. The high priest, aged and wise, looked upon them with a mixture of reverence and sorrow. "Humbaba is no ordinary beast," he warned. "He is a force beyond mortal reckoning, a servant of the god's will. Even the bravest warriors fall before him." Gilgamesh smiled, undeterred. "Then we shall see if the gods have made him invincible." Shamash, watching from the heavens, took pity on them. A gust of wind rippled through the temple, and the flames of the offering bowls flared high. "Go forth, warriors," the priest interpreted the sign. "Shamash grants you his favor, but beware, the path will test not only your strength but your souls." That evening they set forth. Armed with mighty axes and swords crafted by Uruk's finest smiths, they ventured beyond the walls, beyond the reach of men, into the untamed wilds. The city, now distant behind them, faded into memory. The road ahead was uncertain, but their resolve was not. The journey was perilous. For days they walked through desolate plains and dense forests, where the cries of unseen creatures echoed in the night. They crossed roaring rivers, their currents fierce and relentless, pressing forward despite exhaustion. As they neared the cedar forest, dreams troubled their sleep. Gilgamesh saw visions, whispers of gods conspiring, shadows moving beyond mortal sight. Enkidu, attuned to the forces of the wild, sensed the unease in the air. "The gods know of our coming," he murmured. "They are watching." One night, under a sky vast and endless, Gilgamesh sat by the fire, his thoughts turning inward. "Do you fear death, Enkidu?" he asked. Enkidu gazed into the flames. "I once feared nothing, but the more I learn of men, the more I see what they cherish and what they lose." Gilgamesh nodded, understanding. "Then we must carve our names so deep into history that even death cannot erase them." At dawn they stood at the edge of the cedar forest. Towering trees, ancient and imposing, stretched endlessly before them. The scent of resin filled the air, thick and intoxicating. This was the domain of Humbaba. Gilgamesh took the first step into the shadows of the towering woods, Enkidu at his side. The gods watched, the earth held its breath, and fate prepared to unveil its hand. Their legend was just beginning. The towering trees of the cedar forest loomed over them, their ancient trunks whispering secrets of forgotten times. A strange, oppressive silence hung in the air. No birds sang, no insects stirred. The very wind seemed to hold its breath. Then the ground trembled. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the trees, a noise that was neither growl nor roar, but something in between, something ancient, something wrong. Gilgamesh tightened his grip on his axe, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. He was here. From the darkness of the trees, Humbaba emerged. His presence was monstrous, taller than any man, broader than a war chariot, his skin a patchwork of stone and bark, as though he had been born from the very forest itself. His face twisted, grotesque, neither beast nor human, his eyes burning like twin embers set deep in his skull. He did not attack immediately. Instead, he spoke. "You fools," he rumbled, his voice a landslide, crashing through the silence. "You stand in my domain, yet you think yourselves strong. You are nothing but dust beneath my feet." Gilgamesh stepped forward, his chin high, his voice steady despite the fear that gripped him. "We have come to defeat you, guardian of the forest. We will cut down your trees and end your reign." A deep, rattling laughter erupted from Humbaba's throat, making the air vibrate. "End my reign," he mocked. "Do you know what you have done? The gods themselves placed me here to protect this sacred place. If you raise your weapons against me, you will be cursed. The land will suffer. Your city will fall." Enkidu, standing beside Gilgamesh, spat on the ground. "Enough words. Let us see if you are as strong as your threats." Humbaba's expression darkened, his mouth curled into a snarl, and then he attacked. With terrifying speed, the beast lunged forward, his massive arms swinging in a brutal arc. Gilgamesh barely dodged in time, the force of the blow shattering a tree where he had stood just moments before. The sound of splintering wood echoed like thunder. Enkidu rushed in from the side, his club raised high. He struck Humbaba's ribs with all his might, but the monster barely flinched. Instead, he turned on Enkidu, grabbing him with a hand like an iron vice. Gilgamesh roared and swung his axe. The blade struck true, biting into Humbaba's shoulder. The beast howled in fury, releasing Enkidu, who stumbled back, gasping for breath. Humbaba stepped away, breathing hard. His eyes flickered between them, calculating. Then a slow, wicked grin spread across his twisted face. "You cannot win," he hissed. "Not without the gods' favor. Do you think they will save you now?" For the first time, hesitation flickered across Gilgamesh's face. He had dreamt of this moment, trained for this battle, but now, standing before the monstrous guardian, doubt crept in. Enkidu saw it. "No, Gilgamesh!" he shouted. "Do not listen to him! Strike now, while we have the chance!" Gilgamesh tightened his grip on his axe. He could feel the weight of destiny pressing upon him. There was no turning back. With a battle cry that shook the heavens, he charged. The battle raged. Axes clashed, roars echoed. The earth trembled. The cedar forest bore witness as man and monster clashed in a struggle as old as time itself. But victory was not yet certain. The forest stood still. The wind had fled, the birds had vanished, and the towering cedars bore silent witness to the clash between mortals and monster. The scent of sap and blood mingled in the air. Humbaba staggered, his breath ragged, his massive chest rising and falling. Deep wounds marred his once impenetrable flesh, gashes from Gilgamesh's axe, bruises from Enkidu's relentless blows. He swayed, his monstrous form trembling. For the first time in an eternity, the guardian of the forest knew fear. Gilgamesh, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, raised his weapon once more. "It is over, beast," he said, his voice hard as stone. Humbaba's burning eyes flickered between them, and suddenly the fire within them dimmed. He took a step back. His massive hands, once curled into fists, now reached outward, not in attack, but in supplication. "No!" he rasped. "Spare me!" Gilgamesh hesitated. The beast, the terrible monster they had feared, now looked almost human. "Spare me!" Humbaba begged again, his voice cracking. "I was placed here by the gods. It was not by my own will that I became this creature, this guardian. I have done only as I was commanded." He fell to his knees, the ground shuddering beneath his weight, his enormous gnarled hands pressed together in a desperate plea. Enkidu's expression twisted with disgust. "Do not listen to him, Gilgamesh. This is his trickery. If we let him live, he will call upon the gods to destroy us." Humbaba turned his weary eyes to Gilgamesh. "Number, if you spare me, I will serve you. I will be your ally, your protector. The gods have forsaken me, but you could be my new master." Gilgamesh's grip on his axe tightened. The words hung in the air, thick with destiny. Could it be true? Could a monster become an ally? Could mercy be the greater path? But Enkidu's voice cut through his thoughts like a blade. "No, my friend. Kill him now. If we hesitate, he will regain his strength and we will never leave this forest alive. The gods will be furious either way. Better we leave them furious and victorious than dead and forgotten." Gilgamesh turned his gaze to Humbaba once more. The great guardian knelt before him, weak, vulnerable, but his eyes still burned with something hidden. A secret, a warning. The king of Uruk made his choice. With a mighty cry, he swung his axe. The blade cut deep, severing flesh, cracking bone. A howl of agony tore through the forest, shaking the trees, scattering the creatures that lurked in the shadows. A second strike, a third, and then silence. Humbaba's massive form collapsed to the ground, his life spilling onto the sacred earth. His burning eyes flickered one last time, and then the light within them died. It was done. A sudden gust of wind roared through the forest. The trees groaned, the ground trembled, the sky darkened as if the very heavens themselves recoiled in horror. Then came the sound, a voice not of man nor beast, but of something greater. The gods had seen. Their fury crackled through the air, unseen but undeniable. The earth beneath them trembled, as if the forest itself wept for its fallen guardian. Gilgamesh and Enkidu stood in the aftermath of their victory, their chests heaving, their weapons slick with blood. But even in their triumph, they knew this was not the end. The gods would not forget, and they would not forgive. The sun hung low over Uruk, casting long golden shadows across its mighty walls. The city was alive with celebration. The people cheered, drums thundered, and flutes sang a triumphant tune. The scent of roasted meats and honeyed wine filled the air. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, still stained with the dirt and blood of their victory, entered the city as conquerors. The streets swelled with voices crying their names, hailing them as gods among men. But amidst the music and joy, a pair of eyes watched. From the heights of her temple, Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, gazed upon Gilgamesh. The glow of victory upon his skin, the strength in his limbs, the fire in his eyes, he was unlike any mortal she had seen before. A slow, knowing smile curved her lips. She descended from her temple, her presence turning heads, silencing whispers. Where she walked, men bowed. Where her gaze fell, hearts burned with longing. And yet, only one man interested her now. She found him at the palace, standing upon the balcony, looking over the city he ruled. He held a goblet of wine, but he did not drink. His thoughts were elsewhere. She stepped into the torchlight. "Gilgamesh," she purred, her voice like silk sliding over steel. He turned, his brow furrowing for only a moment before he composed himself. "Great Ishtar," he said, bowing his head, though not in submission. "What brings the goddess of love to my halls tonight?" She stepped closer. "Your strength is unmatched. Your deeds are legendary. You have conquered men and monsters alike. But what is power without love?" Her fingers, delicate yet strong, traced the rim of his goblet. "Take me as your wife, Gilgamesh. Be my king. Together we shall rule this world. Your enemies will fall before you. Your city will prosper. The gods themselves will kneel to us." She leaned in, her breath warm against his skin. "With me, you will know pleasure beyond all things. With me, you will never be alone." The hall stood silent. Even the torches seemed to dim, waiting for his answer. And then he laughed. It was not a chuckle nor a polite refusal. It was a deep, full laugh, the laugh of a man who had seen too much, fought too hard, and feared nothing. "Is that why you have come?" he said, amusement still in his voice. "To make me your next plaything? Do you think I do not know what becomes of the men who love you?" Her smile faltered, just slightly. Gilgamesh stepped forward, his eyes locked onto hers, unyielding. "Tell me, Ishtar, where is Tammuz, your first love? Did he not wither beneath your touch? And the shepherd who brought you sweet offerings, was he not struck down by your wrath? The hunter, the warrior, the prince, all who loved you have fallen, cursed by your whim. And now you wish to make me the next?" His voice turned sharp, like a blade drawn from its sheath. "I will not be your pawn." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with tension, with fire, with the crackling of something dangerous about to erupt. Ishtar's smile vanished. Eyes burned with humiliation, with fury, with the rage of a goddess scorned. "You dare reject me." Her voice, once sweet, now shook the very walls of Uruk. Gilgamesh did not flinch. "I do," he said simply. For the first time in eternity, Ishtar was speechless, but only for a moment. Then her hands clenched into fists. "If I cannot have you, then I will make you suffer." She turned on her heel, her white robes billowing around her like a storm. The torches flickered wildly as she vanished into the night, her fury trailing behind her. But she was not done. No, Ishtar would have her revenge, and Uruk would pay the price. The night over Uruk was thick with an unnatural silence. Not a breeze stirred, not a dog barked. It was as if the city itself was holding its breath. And then the earth shook. A terrible, echoing roar shattered the quiet, a sound that did not belong to this world. It was not the growl of a lion or the scream of a dying beast. It was something ancient, something divine. The bull of heaven had arrived. From the sky it descended, an enormous, monstrous thing, its muscles carved from the very bones of the earth, its eyes burning like twin suns. Its great hooves struck the ground, and the streets cracked beneath its weight. Buildings trembled, the city's walls groaned, and then, with one terrible breath, it struck. A blast of wind and fire erupted from its nostrils, sweeping through the streets like a storm. Men were flung from their feet, market stalls shattered, houses collapsed. The very ground beneath Uruk split apart, swallowing the unlucky. The people screamed in terror. This was no ordinary beast. This was vengeance. Ishtar had made good on her promise. From the temple steps she watched, her lips curled in satisfaction. "Now, Gilgamesh," she whispered, "let us see if you still laugh." Across the city, Gilgamesh and Enkidu armed themselves. They had fought men. They had fought giants. But this was something else. The palace trembled as another shockwave split the ground. The roars of the divine beast filled the air. Gilgamesh grinned, unshaken. "So this is the best she can do?" he said, tightening his grip on his axe. Enkidu, standing beside him, did not smile. "This is no mortal enemy, Gilgamesh," he warned. "It is sent by the gods. If we fail, there will be no second chance." Gilgamesh glanced at him. "Then we do not fail." And with that, they ran to battle. The fight began in the ruins of the marketplace. The bull of heaven swung its enormous head, its horns tearing through stone and wood like paper. Gilgamesh dodged, rolling beneath the beast as it charged. His axe flashed, striking its side, but it was like hitting a mountain. The bull reared, kicking out with its powerful legs. Enkidu barely leaped away in time. The impact shattered the ground, opening a chasm beneath them. "We need a plan," Enkidu shouted. Gilgamesh's mind raced. This was no mindless creature. It was fast, powerful, divine, and then an idea. "Enkidu!" he called. "Distract it. Keep it facing you." Enkidu didn't hesitate. He ran straight at the beast. The bull roared, its monstrous eyes locking onto him. It charged, hooves thundering against the ground. At the last moment, Enkidu leapt aside. The bull, unable to stop its momentum, stumbled for the first time. And that was all Gilgamesh needed. With a roar of his own, he lunged. He grabbed the beast by its massive horns, his muscles straining, his feet digging into the cracked earth. The weight was immense. The power was godlike. But so was he. The bull of heaven struggled, twisting, thrashing. It bellowed, its fury shaking the sky. But Gilgamesh did not let go. Then Enkidu struck. With all his might, he plunged his blade into the beast's neck. The bull screamed, a terrible, unnatural sound that echoed into the heavens. Again, Enkidu struck, and again, blood, thick and black like the night sky, poured from the beast's wound. Its mighty legs buckled. Gilgamesh, still holding its horns, twisted. With one final, earth-shattering effort, he broke its neck. The bull of heaven collapsed. The ground trembled. The gods watched. The people of Uruk stood frozen, and on the temple steps Ishtar screamed. She descended in fury, her eyes burning like twin stars about to explode. "You dare!" she shrieked. "You dare slay what is mine! You dare defy me!" Gilgamesh, still breathing heavily, turned to face her, and he smiled. "You sent your beast," he said, voice calm, unwavering, "and we have killed it." Enkidu, standing beside him, scoffed. "Is this all the gods have to offer? Send another, and we shall do the same." The goddess trembled with rage, but there was nothing she could do. The bull of heaven lay dead at her feet, and with it, her power, her revenge, her pride. Gilgamesh stepped forward, and without a word, he kicked the carcass of the bull. The people cheered. Ishtar's anger turned to hatred. "This is not over," she whispered, and somewhere, far beyond the mortal world, The gods whispered back. Their judgment was coming, and soon someone would pay the price. The night was heavy, the air thick and unmoving, pressed against the walls of Uruk like an unseen hand. The city slept, but Enkidu did not. He awoke with a start, his chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. A cold sweat clung to his skin. His fingers dug into the silken sheets beneath him, his heart pounding as if he had just escaped a terrible fate. But the nightmare had not ended. He turned his head. Gilgamesh lay beside him, sleeping peacefully, the rhythm of his breath steady. Enkidu swallowed hard. He had seen something, not a dream, a vision. A whispering voice still echoed in his mind, distant yet deafening. It had spoken in a language not meant for mortals, in a voice that was neither man nor beast. And what it had told him? His body trembled. Gilgamesh! His voice was barely more than a breath, but it was enough. The king stirred, groggily turning toward him. "What is it, Enkidu?" Enkidu's hands clenched into fists. He forced himself to breathe. "I have seen my death." The words hung in the air, leaden, unmoving. Gilgamesh blinked. "What?" "The gods," Enkidu whispered, his voice tight. "They have decided. They will kill me." Gilgamesh sat up, shaking off sleep. "What are you saying?" His voice was sharp now, alert. "No one will kill you. We are the strongest. We have defied monsters, gods. We slew the bull of heaven." Enkidu laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. His eyes, once filled with fire, were dark, empty. "It is not a battle, my friend," he murmured. "There is no enemy to fight. No sword can stop this. The gods have spoken." Gilgamesh opened his mouth, ready to argue, but then he saw it, the fear in Enkidu's eyes. Not fear of battle, not fear of pain, fear of something far worse. "Tell me," Gilgamesh said, "tell me what you saw." Enkidu closed his eyes, and the vision returned. He was standing in a wasteland. The sky above was black, void of sun or moon. The ground beneath him was cracked and dry, stretching endlessly in all directions. And before him stood a great iron gate. It towered over him, so vast that it swallowed the horizon, its black surface glistening like wet stone. The air was heavy, thick with whispers, with voices that belonged to no living soul. Something was waiting. A figure moved in the shadows, a faceless being, a guardian of the underworld. Its presence made his skin crawl. It reached for him, not in anger, not in cruelty, but with finality. This was no battle, this was a sentence. He had tried to turn, to run, but the gate had opened. A wind, cold and relentless, dragged him forward. He was falling, falling into the dark, falling into nothing. And then he woke. Enkidu's breath shuddered. "I saw the underworld, Gilgamesh," he whispered. "I felt its grip on me." Gilgamesh shook his head, his jaw tightening. No, this is madness. We will stop this. There is always a way." Enkidu looked at him for a long moment, then exhaled, a slow, weary sigh. "It is decided," he said. Silence. Then a sound, a distant rumble. Gilgamesh turned his head toward the window. A storm was forming. Clouds thick as smoke rolled across the sky, swallowing the stars. The wind howled, a low, mournful sound. The gods were watching. Their judgment had begun. The winds howled over Uruk, carrying whispers that no man should hear. The city was silent. No music played. No voices rose in celebration. The laughter that once echoed through the streets had faded, leaving only the heavy stillness of dread. Inside the palace, beneath the flickering torchlight, Enkidu lay dying. His skin, once tanned and strong, had turned pale. His breath came in slow, uneven gasps. Sweat clung to his brow, soaking the sheets beneath him. He was no longer the warrior who had stood beside Gilgamesh, no longer the man who had wrestled beasts and defied gods. He was a man fading, and Gilgamesh was helpless. He sat at Enkidu's side, gripping his hand, watching as life slipped away. His fingers, once so strong, now felt weak in Gilgamesh's grasp. His eyes, once filled with fire, now flickered like dying embers. "It was decided," Enkidu whispered, his voice barely more than breath. Gilgamesh shook his head. "No," he said, voice raw. "No, this is not how it ends." Enkidu smiled, a small, sad thing. "My friend, you cannot fight the gods." Gilgamesh clenched his jaw. Then I will challenge them. "You will do nothing," Enkidu murmured, squeezing his hand. "Because you are not a god, Gilgamesh. You are a man, and men, they die." Gilgamesh felt something cold wrap around his chest. He could not breathe. "You do not deserve this," he whispered. Enkidu let out a soft, ragged laugh. "Neither did the beasts we hunted, neither did Humbaba, neither did the bull of heaven." He coughed, his body shuddering. "We thought ourselves above fate, but we were wrong. The gods never forget." The words hung in the air like a blade, poised to strike. Then Enkidu turned his gaze to the ceiling. "I dreamt again," he said. "I was standing at the gates of the underworld." Gilgamesh stiffened. "No!" Enkidu's eyes darkened, unfocused. "I saw them. The kings, the warriors, the great men of old. But they were not great. They were shadows, feasting on dust, crawling in darkness, forgotten." His voice faltered. "Gilgamesh, it is terrible." His grip on Gilgamesh's hand tightened, suddenly desperate. "I do not want to go," he whispered. Gilgamesh felt something inside him break. "You will not," he swore, his voice shaking. "I will save you." But the words meant nothing. Enkidu's breath grew slower. His body, once strong, now barely moved beneath the sheets. His chest rose, then fell, and did not rise again. Gilgamesh froze. "Enkidu." Nothing. "Enkidu." Still nothing. Gilgamesh grabbed his shoulders, shaking him. "Wake up! This is not how it ends!" But it was. The king of Uruk, the man who had conquered forests and beasts, who had defied gods, who had feared nothing, now feared one thing alone: death. And now it was real. Not a battle, not a legend, not a story whispered in temples. It was here. And it had taken his friend, the mighty Gilgamesh, who had never wept, who had laughed in the face of danger, who had stood fearless against monsters, collapsed. His body shook, his hands curled into fists, his breath came in broken, gasping sobs. His heart screamed, but the gods did not answer. And as the sun rose over Uruk, its golden light spilling into the room, Gilgamesh remained in the darkness. The wind howled as Gilgamesh stepped into the unknown. He had left Uruk behind, his throne, his people, his kingdom, all for one thing. Not wealth, not power, life, eternal life, because death had come for Enkidu. And one day it would come for him, unless he stopped it. He walked through lands untouched by mortal feet, across endless plains where the wind whispered his name. He climbed mountains so high that the sky itself seemed to shatter above him. He passed through forests where the trees whispered secrets older than time, their roots tangled around the bones of forgotten kings. And then he reached the end of the world. The mountain loomed before him, black and sharp, cutting into the sky like the blade of a god's sword. No man had ever crossed it. No man had ever returned. And yet he did not stop. Two figures stood at the entrance, guardians, beings not of flesh and bone, but of fire and shadow. Their eyes burned with light that was not of this world. Their swords pulsed with power that could unmake a man with a single strike. Gilgamesh did not flinch. "I must pass." One of them tilted its head. "No mortal may enter." "I am no ordinary man." A silence stretched between them, heavy, endless. Then, for the first time in eternity, the guardians stepped aside. Beyond them, the tunnel gaped like the mouth of a beast, dark, silent, endless. He stepped inside. The world swallowed him whole. Time unravelled. The darkness pressed against him, thick as water, suffocating. He ran, not out of fear, but because if he stopped, he would be lost. He did not know if he ran for hours, for days, for years. The darkness had no mercy. It stole his breath, his thoughts, his soul. And then, light. He stumbled forward, gasping, and the world around him was not the world he had known. The air was thick with the scent of fruit, the sweetness of something forbidden. Trees stretched high, but their leaves were not leaves. They were gemstones, shimmering, pulsing, alive. Flowers of fire bloomed at his feet, and then he saw them. Figures stood among the trees, tall, silent, unmoving, the stone men. They had no breath, no voices, no souls, but their eyes followed him. He clenched his fists, ready for battle, but the stone men did not move. They only watched, and so he walked on. The land vanished beneath his feet. Before him stretched an ocean that should not exist, silver, still, endless. The water did not ripple, did not breathe. It was not alive, and at its edge, beneath a vine-covered hut, a woman waited. Her hair was silver, her skin lined with time, but her eyes were sharp, filled with knowing. She watched him approach, and when she spoke, her voice was smooth as river stones. "You have come far, King of Uruk. I seek Utnapishtim," he said, wasting no words. "The one who has conquered death." Siduri sighed. "Then you seek what cannot be found." His fists clenched. "I will not turn back." She studied him, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned toward the water. "There," she said, pointing to the endless expanse. "Beyond these waters lies the land where Utnapishtim waits." Gilgamesh's breath caught. "So I must cross." Siduri shook her head. "This is no ordinary sea, Gilgamesh. These are the waters of death." Her voice dropped, thick with warning. "Even the gods fear this place." He did not move. "Then I will find a way." Siduri exhaled, watching him as though she could already see his fate unraveling. Then she spoke. "There is one, Urshanabi, the ferryman, but he does not take passengers willingly." Gilgamesh nodded. Then he walked toward his fate. The reeds whispered around him as he stepped to the water's edge, and there, waiting in the mist, was Urshanabi. His boat was carved from darkness itself, its edges blurred like a thing that did not belong in this world. And beside him stood his stone men. Gilgamesh did not hesitate. "You are Urshanabi." The ferryman lifted his head, his eyes dark as the sea beneath him. "And you are a fool. I must cross." Urshanabi tilted his head. "And why should I take you?" Gilgamesh's gaze flicked toward the boat. The silver water stretched beyond it, endless, waiting. "I will cross," he said. The ferryman's eyes flickered toward the stone men. "They are my oars," he said, "the only ones who can touch the water without perishing." Gilgamesh's jaw tightened. "Then let us go," Urshanabi sighed. "You do not understand. The moment you stepped here, you have doomed them." Before Gilgamesh could react, the stone men crumbled to dust. The ground trembled, the boat shuddered, the oars were gone. Gilgamesh's stomach turned cold. "What have you done?" Urshanabi's face was unreadable. The gods do not allow easy paths. Silence. Then Gilgamesh stepped forward. "Then I will make my own way." The ferryman studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. "Then cut the reeds, King of Uruk," he said, "and build yourself a new fate." And so Gilgamesh sailed, across waters that whispered of death, across a sea where even gods feared to tread, toward the one man who had defeated time itself, toward Utnapishtim and the answer to eternity. The boat slid through the silver waters, cutting through the stillness like a blade. The waters of death did not stir. They did not ripple. They did not breathe. Gilgamesh sat at the front, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not speak. He did not blink. He had come too far to fail now. Urshanabi, the ferryman, rowed in silence, his face unreadable. For hours, for days, or was it weeks, they drifted through the endless expanse, moving towards something unseen, something forbidden. And then a shape appeared in the distance. A black speck against an empty world. Gilgamesh's fingers curled into fists, his breath caught in his chest. They were close. As the boat drew nearer, the shape became clearer. An island rising from the water, like the last remnant of an ancient world. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering cliffs of dark stone loomed over the shore. A dense fog clung to the land, twisting through trees with branches that stretched like skeletal hands. And at its center, a lone figure stood waiting. They stepped onto the shore, the black sand cold beneath Gilgamesh's feet. The figure did not move, did not speak. He was old, older than time itself. His beard, white as bone, reached his chest. His skin, weathered and lined, bore the weight of centuries, and yet his eyes burned like embers that refused to die. Utnapishtim, the man who had defeated death. Gilgamesh exhaled, stepping forward. "I have come far," he said. "I have crossed the lands of men and beasts. I have slain monsters and defied the gods. I have walked through darkness and sailed the waters of death. And now I stand before you." Utnapishtim watched him, silent. "I ask you," Gilgamesh continued, his voice steady, his heart hammering, "tell me the secret. Tell me how to live forever." For a long moment there was only silence. Then Utnapishtim laughed. It was not cruel. It was not mocking. It was the laughter of a man who had seen too much, who had watched the world rise and fall and rise again. "You seek eternal life?" Utnapishtim said. "Then tell me, Gilgamesh, what is it you fear?" Gilgamesh clenched his jaw. "I fear nothing." Utnapishtim shook his head. "Number! You fear death. You have seen it take your friend. You have felt its shadow crawl beneath your skin. And now you think you can escape it?" He turned, looking out over the endless waters. "But tell me, King of Uruk, what is left of those who came before you? The great kings, the warriors, the wise men? Where are they now?" Gilgamesh did not answer. "They are dust," Utnapishtim said, "and so too will you be." Gilgamesh stepped forward, his hands trembling. "There must be a way." Utnapishtim sighed. "Perhaps," he said. "Prove yourself." Gilgamesh stiffened. Utnapishtim's gaze was unreadable. "If you wish to defeat death, you must first defeat sleep." Gilgamesh frowned. "Sleep?" Utnapishtim nodded. "It is the twin of death, is it not? If you can resist its pull for 7 days and 7 nights, then perhaps you are worthy of eternity." The challenge settled in the air like a curse. 7 days, 7 nights. Gilgamesh squared his shoulders. "I will not close my eyes." Utnapishtim did not reply. He only watched. And so Gilgamesh sat. The first day passed, and he sat in silence. The second day, and he felt the weight pressing against him. By the third, his mind began to drift. The fourth, his body ached, his head throbbed, his vision blurred. On the fifth, he saw shadows moving in the corners of his eyes, shapes that were not there. Or were they? The sixth, his breath slowed, his thoughts tangled. The seventh. Darkness took him. He did not know when it happened. He only knew that he woke to the sound of laughter. Utnapishtim stood before him, smiling sadly. "You have failed." Gilgamesh jerked upright, his heart pounding. "No," he whispered. His voice died. The sun had moved across the sky. The days had passed. He had slept. He had lost. His breath hitched. "Give me another chance." Utnapishtim shook his head. 7 days and 7 nights have passed, Gilgamesh. You could not resist even sleep. How can you resist death?" Gilgamesh felt the world collapse beneath him. Everything he had fought for, everything he had endured, gone. A tremor ran through his hands. He felt his chest tighten, his throat burn. "No," he said, "this cannot be the end." Utnapishtim watched him, pity in his eyes. For the first time Gilgamesh felt small, a man, only a man. He had walked across the world. He had defied gods and monsters. He had fought, conquered, bled, and still he would die. For a long time he did not move. Then Utnapishtim spoke again. "There is one thing," he said. Gilgamesh's head snapped up. Utnapishtim turned toward the shore. "Beneath the sea, at the bottom of the world, there grows a plant. Its roots drink from the waters of eternity. Its leaves carry the gift of youth. If you find it, it may restore what time has stolen." Gilgamesh's breath caught. Hope, a new kind of fire, ignited in his chest. He could not have eternity, but he could have this. Without another word, he ran to the water's edge. He took a deep breath, and he dove. The sea closed over him, swallowing him whole. The water closed over him, pulling him into the depths. The world above vanished, swallowed by silence. Gilgamesh dove deeper. The pressure tightened around his chest, but he did not stop. He kicked harder, pushing himself down, deeper into the abyss where no light had ever touched. His lungs burned, his vision blurred, but he saw it. A faint glow beneath him, swaying with the current like a ghostly flame. The plant, the flower of eternity. It grew from the very bones of the earth, its roots twisting through the dark, feeding on something ancient, something older than the gods themselves. His fingers stretched toward it, his body screamed for air. But he did not hesitate. He would not fail again. His hand closed around the stem, and with a single pull, it came free. For a moment there was nothing but silence. And then he kicked upward, pushing toward the light, toward the surface, toward life. His head burst from the water, and he gasped, filling his lungs with air. The world around him spun, but in his hand he held the secret to youth. A ragged laugh escaped his throat. He had lost the god's test. He had failed to resist sleep. But now he had won something greater. He could not live forever, but he could return to Uruk and give this gift to his people. He could end the suffering of men, free them from age, from weakness. His journey had not been in vain. He waded back to shore, his limbs heavy, his breath sharp. But in his grip the plant pulsed with a strange warmth. He would return. He would return a king. The road home was long. He crossed deserts and mountains, lands stripped of life. But nothing could break him now. The plant was safe. The promise of youth lay within his grasp. And then the river. The air was hot, thick with the scent of dust and reeds. He knelt at the water's edge, the journey weighing heavy in his bones. He had not slept in days. He had not eaten. His body ached. But he had won. A sigh slipped past his lips as he lowered the plant beside him, dipping his hands into the cool water. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he allowed himself to rest. The river lapped softly at the shore. A breeze whispered through the reeds, and then a rustle. A flicker of movement in the corner of his vision. Before he could react, before he could even turn, it struck. A shape, sleek and silent, a flash of scales, a mouth stretching wide, a serpent. It slithered from the shadows, fast, precise, and it took the plant. Gilgamesh's breath caught. The serpent's jaws closed around the stem, and in an instant it coiled back into the reeds, vanishing as quickly as it had come. For a heartbeat, Gilgamesh could not move. His hands still dripped with water, his knees pressed into the damp earth. And before him, where the plant had been, there was nothing. His chest tightened, his throat burned. "No!" The word fell from his lips, hoarse, broken. He lunged forward, his hands grasping at the empty space where the plant had been, clawing at the earth as if he could undo time. But the river only whispered back to him, gentle and cruel. It was gone. All of it gone. He had travelled to the ends of the earth. He had defied gods, slain monsters, crossed the waters of death. For nothing. His fingers curled into fists. His shoulders shook. The serpent had taken what he could not, and he was still just a man. A long breath escaped his lips. At first, it was quiet. Then it grew. A sound unlike any he had ever made, a sound that did not belong to kings or warriors, a sound that was raw, broken, laughter, soft at first, then bitter, then louder, cracking in his chest like something splitting open. He had come so far, only to be undone by a creature that had not fought, had not struggled, a simple thief slithering from the shadows. The gods had won. He laughed until he could no longer breathe. And then he stood. Uruk rose in the distance, its walls towering against the sky. The journey was over. The dust clung to his skin. His body was worn, his heart empty. But his steps were steady. The plant was gone. The dream of eternity had slipped through his fingers. But as he neared the gates, he looked up. Uruk, the city he had built, the city that would stand long after he was gone. And in that moment, something shifted. He had not defeated death. He would not live forever. But his name would. His hands had raised these walls. His people would walk these streets long after his bones had turned to dust. And perhaps that was enough. He stepped onto the great road, his shadow stretching before him, swallowed by the golden light of the setting sun. And as he passed through the gates of Uruk, he was no longer searching. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to explore more fascinating stories and enrich your knowledge. What did you think of the epic tale of Gilgamesh? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts and discussions help keep these ancient legends alive. See you in the next adventure.